Join the coven. The Hangman's Tree. A story written by The Record in 1981. I would like to start by giving you all a piece of advice. Do not, under any circumstances, research the town that you live in. Knowing the history of the place you call home can change everything. The place you feel safe will twist and bend into something more malicious. My name is Chloe Lewis. I am 15 years old and live in a small town called Pine Grove. Now, you won't find a record of anything that I say on here, and that is because the history of my town has slowly been forgotten. If it wasn't for my stupid school project, it would have stayed forgotten. I awoke that Monday morning like I did every morning. The glaring sun shone through my bedroom window, disrupting my sleep. The sun blinded me for a moment as my eyes flickered open and adjusted to the light. I could smell the succulent aroma of bacon slowly filling my senses as it flowed through the house. I flew out of bed and down the creaky wood stairs like I was in a cartoon floating towards the source of the delightful smell. "Bacon, please," I said as I walked into the kitchen with my arms stretched out in front of me. My mom turned to give me a disapproving look. "Chloe, I think you meant to say was, 'Good morning, Mum. How are you today?'" I gave her a cheeky smile and took a seat at the breakfast bar. "Hey, Mom, where's Kieran?" I asked while shoving fistfuls of sweet, crunchy bacon into my mouth faster than I could chew it. "Your brother had football practice, so he left early," Mom said as she started running the tap. You could see the bubbles slowly starting to rise out of the sink. I gave her another cheeky smile as I realized that if Kieran isn't here, then there's more bacon for me. By the time I finished, I didn't want to go to school. I was on the edge of falling into a food coma. I begrudgingly went back to my room to get changed for school. I combed my hair into a messy bun and left. I usually find my walk to school relaxing, but something about this day left a pit in the bottom of my stomach that I just couldn't shake. As I walked through the front gates of the school, I had no idea how much my life would have changed if I would have just stayed in bed that day. "Good morning, Chloe. Looking forward to another day at school?" I turned around to see Amy standing behind me. Amy has been my best friend since we were 2 years old. As always, her long, dark auburn hair was tied into a tight ponytail, and her large horn-rimmed glasses covered most of her face. "Morning, Amy. I would love to say yes, but I have history first period, and I'm fighting a food coma after the mountain of bacon I ate this morning." Amy smiled at me before letting out a sigh as she headed into school. I took a deep breath and joined the sea of students entering the building. I always hated history, and it's not for the reason you think. I like our teacher, Mrs. Clark, and I understand why history is important. The reason why I hate it is because every year we learn about the same subjects. World War I and II, followed by how medicine has been used over the past 1,000 years. Every year it was the same. So when Mrs. Clark said that we had a special project for the next couple weeks, I could barely contain my excitement. Mrs. Clark started to explain what the new project would be about, but between us, Mrs. Clark wasn't very good at getting to the point. So I'll give you the short version. We were told that we can study the history of anything we wanted. Some of the examples that she gave were the history of your family or the history of your favorite food. Even as Mrs. Clark started listing more examples, I already knew what I wanted to research. I decided to look into the history of my town. In hindsight, I wish I would have chosen something else. I was too excited to focus on the rest of my lessons, so as soon as the bell rang for lunch, I split off from the students heading to the cafeteria and headed towards our library. "Good afternoon, Mr. Moore," I whispered as I walked into the library. Mr. Moore was our school librarian, his long messy hair that intertwined with his bushy beard. I always loved our library. Everywhere you looked, there were shelves filled to the brim with books. You could hear the sound of rustling papers and students typing on the computers echoing throughout the library. "Good afternoon, Chloe. Shouldn't you be having lunch with your friends instead of hiding in here?" The truth was, I didn't have a lot of friends. Other than Amy, my social life was non-existent. "Mrs. Clark has given my class a new project, so I need to find any information we have on the history of our town." Mr. Moore dropped his fun-loving outer shell, and his expression became one of both concern and fear. "Chloe, wouldn't you have more fun researching something more interesting? Honestly, our town history is pretty boring in comparison to most things you could be researching." As he started organizing one of the shelves, labeled Science, I noticed that he stopped making eye contact with me, and his eyes were frantically darting around the library. "Sir, are you all right?" He gave me no response. I walked over to the history part of the bookshelf. There was a thick layer of dust coating the section for local history. I turned to ask Mr. Moore about the lack of books, but he was nowhere to be seen. I turned back to the deserted shelf, and as I stood there staring blankly into the dust-covered void, trying to think of something else to research, my eyes wandered to the bottom of the set of shelves. I crouched down, trying to work out what I could see, and as I reached my hand under the shelf, my hand caught something leathery. I admit I let out a small screech as I reeled my hand back. I was holding a yearbook. It was coated in a deep purple leather with gold writing across the front that read, "Yearbook, Class of 1985. Under the title was a large bronze oak tree. Its branches were reaching and wrapping around the rest of the book. It was beautiful, but I didn't understand why they chose a tree, as our school logo is a chipmunk holding a football. Believe me, I know it's cheesy, but that's what the logo was on every textbook, uniform, and poster in the school. So I was puzzled why in 1985 it was a tree, and why they changed it. There was no one else in the library, as at some point the rest of the students, along with Mr. Moore, had left. I could hear the blood pumping through my ears, and I felt a biting cold shiver run down my spine as I sat down and opened the yearbook. My first thought was, wow. Even though the book was in black and white, I could tell that the fashion in the 80s was different than it was nowadays. I started flicking through the books, laughing to myself at people's quotes, and to my surprise, I found one from Mr. Moore. "Knowledge is important, but some knowledge should never be allowed to see the light of day." Huh, that's a strange thing for someone who became a librarian to say, I said out loud as I stretched back in my chair. I continued flipping through the pages, and when I got to the very center of the book, there was a 2-page spread containing a picture of a large oak tree. Underneath the tree was the writing, "The Hangman's Tree," and written in what appeared to be a deep crimson ink was the following: "When I see the hangman tree, I will not avert my gaze, for the tree is watching me, and so I will obey. Oh, bring the tree some children for it to embrace. The roots will bathe in crimson, and will see his face. His amorphous eyes have no color. His cracking skin has no end. He exists to make you suffer, and so his arms extend. They'll grip you around your throat as you stare back at me. You'll be set afloat and join the Hangman tree. I must have read and reread that strange poem more than 100 times. Every time I read it, I felt a strange, unnatural sense of dread flowing through my body, turning my blood to ice. I heard students beginning to walk towards me, and in my panic, I ripped the page with the poem out of the yearbook and put the book back where I found it. I left the library, avoiding eye contact with everyone. I had a mystery to investigate, and the excitement I felt made my hair stand on end. Now all I knew was that there was something called the Hangman tree, and logically, if I was looking for a tree, then I should start with the forest closest to town, the Spinetail Woods. I left for the forest as soon as my lessons were finished, and I convinced Amy that we should go for a walk in the Spinetail Woods. I probably should have told her about the poem, but she wouldn't have come with me, and I needed someone to come with me. It took us about an hour to get to the opening trail that leads into the heart of the forest. Hey, Amy, if we were looking for a really old oak tree, where would we go? I said as we began walking the winding trail through the woods. That's a strange question to ask. Why are we looking for an oak tree? I paused for a moment as I thought of an excuse. You know the class project Mrs. Clark gave us? Well, I found out there was an old oak tree that's been in this forest since the founding of our town. So I thought I'd research it. Amy gave me a doubting look, but she didn't question me. Instead, we decided that we should head to the middle of the forest and see if we could find something interesting. As we were walking deeper into the forest, the wind felt strange against my skin. It was ice cold, and it felt like the heat from the sun was being swallowed by the canopy of the trees. Chloe, is it just me, or are we lost? I froze in place. I could have sworn we had been following the trail this whole time. We both turned around, and there was a large glade that seemed to materialize out of nothing. The trees surrounding the glade were colorless. Their bark was pale and covered in deep cracks that gave the appearance that a simple gust of wind would knock down every tree in the area. They had no leaves, and even the grass cracked and turned to dust as we began walking to the main attraction. In the very center of the glade was a large, sickly oak tree. It was missing all of its leaves. Its branches looked fatigued, and the whole tree felt like it was staring at me. I kept walking towards it. I was entranced by it. I could hear Amy shouting my name, but I couldn't stop myself. Before I realized it, I was reciting the poem. When I see the hangman tree, I will not avert my gaze, for the tree is watching me, and so I will obey. The bitter wind stopped almost instantly, and a deep, raspy moaning filled my ears. But it wasn't coming from any specific direction. It was in my head, but it felt like the moaning was enveloping me, and the feeling that the tree was staring at me got more intense. I didn't look away, even as Amy's panicked screams started from behind me. I took a deep breath and continued the poem. I'll bring the tree some children for it to embrace. The roots will bathe in crimson, and will see his face. Amy's screams got louder. She was in so much pain I could hear it in her voice. The tree started to move, or was it standing still, and the world was moving around it. The pale bark started to warp into something similar to a face, but it had no definitive lines, no structure. But I could see its cold, dead eyes and a slit that could have been a mouth. I felt lightheaded and I wanted to run. I wanted to turn and face Amy, but I couldn't. So I continued. His amorphous eyes have no color. His cracking skin has no end. He exists to make you suffer, and so his arms extend. Tears were pouring down my face as the branches extended into hundreds of large hands which shot past me. Amy's screams became so high-pitched that it caused my ears to ring. One of the hands approached my face and wiped a tear from my cheek. Its hand was warm to the touch and felt oddly comforting. The tree's mouth began to open into an inhuman smile, and in the corner of my eye, I could see Amy being dragged by the ankles past me. They'll grip around your throat as you stare back at me. I could see Amy clearly as the hands began to grasp around her neck. I wanted to move forward, but I was paralyzed. As soon as my eyes met hers, she stopped struggling as the hands lifted her, so her toes could barely reach the ground. I could see now that her horn-rimmed glasses were tangled up in her now deep crimson hair. I took a deep breath and finished the poem. You'll be set afloat and join the Hangman tree. With that, she was raised higher until I heard a loud cracking sound as the hands broke her neck and the light left her eyes. The branches raised her up, and as her body disappeared into the now vibrant green canopy of the tree, I felt a strange sense of understanding. I never turned in my history project, and they never did find out what happened to Amy or the other missing children.